सानिका मॅम, विशाल सरांना को-होस्ट करता का?
हेडफोन लगा के रखो। हो करते कर।
हाँ ठीक है.
हेलो
हो गया. सानिका मॅम, हॅलो.
यस.
सानिका मॅम, पीपीटी तुम्ही शेअर करणार आहात, सर फक्त बोलणार आहे तिथून.
हो हो ठीक आहे.
सरांना को-होस्ट बनवलं नाही तरी चालेल, काय गरज नाही असं.
हो हो ठीक आहे.
ओके चालेल, मी देतो सरांकडे कंटिन्यू करतो.
या
to tech savvy. बहुत इसमें glitches आते हैं. Then you keep waiting.
The camera on off आणि
चालू केलंय का आपण का
माईक चालू आहे, व्हिडिओ चालू आहे.
थँक्यू सर.
काही लागलं मी बाहेर आहे.
शुअर शुअर.
Hello.
Hello, good morning.
Yes, good morning everyone. Good morning Vishal sir.
Hello.
Welcome to the 5th day of your induction students. Today there will be a session on research techniques by Vishal Jadhav sir. May I please call Dr. Nutan Karnegavkar to welcome sir and give a brief introduction. Good morning to all. Today we have with us Dr. Vishal Jadhav sir. Sir is associated with us for a long time. Sir is MA, MPhil and PhD. Sir has an experience of more than 10 years in teaching. Sir has a keen interest in political sociology, sociology of development, historical sociology. Sir has also completed a project titled Bhau Didi, an evaluation of child labor in Maharashtra for the Municipal Corporation of Aurangabad. Sir has also co-authored a paper with Professor Sujata Patel for the University of Amsterdam Humanist Institute for Cooperation in Developing Countries, the Netherlands. Sir is also, he has a research titled Construction of Masculinity Through Sports, a case of Talims in Maharashtra. Sir is also a member, he's a treasurer of Maharashtra Samaj Shastra Parishad. He is also an active member of ISS and ISA. Sir, we are very glad to have you here. Now, without taking more time of yours, I request you to start with the presentation for today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We'll begin with a brief introduction to what research actually means. Why do we do research? And why is it so important, especially to generate new ideas, etc., etc. So I'll begin with the PowerPoint presentation, so it will be easy for everyone to follow. Okay, so we'll come to the first slide. Can we please come to the first slide? Yes. All of you know, of course, this is Albert Einstein. And the statement he makes here is very interesting because he says, if we knew what it was we were doing, it would not be called research. Now, what is research and why do we do research? I'll go through a few slides with that, and then I'll come to what do we understand by a research proposal, how do we understand research methodology, the types of research, qualitative, quantitative, and then I'll take a small example so that we can reiterate this whole knowledge process of what research is all about. So can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so what do we do in research? Firstly, we begin with a research proposal, which is nothing but a plan that we chalk out. So it is a path that we chalk out. So for instance, we ask very in-depth questions and inherent questions such as, why does a particular phenomena happen? What does it mean? Where does it lead to? Does it lead to some kind of development? Does it lead to a problem, etc., etc.? And how do we go about it is actually what we do in terms of methodology. So how do we collect data for the research that we're supposed to be doing? To answer the questions of why, what, and where. So what kinds of tools do we use? Do we use sampling? Do we use survey? Do we use interviews? Do we use narratives? What kind of methods do we actually use so as to gather this particular data to prove the why, what, and where? And then finally, what are we trying to get out of all this is the product. So when I say product, it is not narrowing down a particular research project, a research work that we're doing or a research proposal that we're doing. And it need not always be that we get a product, final product out of any research, because you might end up actually having more questions rather than a particular answer to a research question. And then finally, after doing this research, can we have any, does it add to the stock of knowledge that we already have? Does it mean that we can actually use it for some kind of leverage in terms of emancipation, in terms of empowerment, in terms of development, etc. We begin with a excuse me, can we yeah, thank you. So how do we go about research? So we begin with a research plan, which is also the research proposal. We ask very fundamental questions as to why do we see a particular phenomena. So for instance, if we were to, can we go back to that slide? Yeah. For instance, if Newton hadn't observed why an apple falls from a tree and why does it fall down, probably we wouldn't have had Newton's theory in physics. So, I mean, the fundamental question is not only about noticing things, but is about observing, is about ruminating on a particular phenomena and asking, why does it happen? And then probably what are the forces that act on it? So what are the structures that act on that particular phenomena that leads to what it is? And then finally, where does it happen and why does it happen in that particular manner? So this is a research proposal that we generally begin with. All of us actually use research in our daily lives also, except we don't do it. It is more of a mechanical virtue that we have developed over time. We have internalized during our school days or schooling days. And so for instance, if we were to go to one place in Pune, say if we were to go to Deccan, we would ask a question, generally asking, which is the shortest route to Deccan? And then we would find out a particular road and then probably come up with the knowledge that, no, that is a one way, so we need to take another route. So we are all constantly asking questions in very similar fashion in terms of why, what, where, etc. and how, of course. So can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so what is the importance of research proposal? Why do we need a direction? Why do we need a pathway? Firstly, we need to reason out what we are doing and why we are doing what we propose to do. So you need a reason to do research. You just don't think about something and start doing it. You need to chew on that idea for a very long time, think about it, and then probably when you don't have answers, you reason and you ask why, where, when, etc. Second is coverage. Um, how much of the research and how far are you going to do it? So, for instance, if I were to ask a seminal question about COVID rates in Maharashtra. Will I be covering the whole population of Maharashtra, or would I be taking samples? So, what is the coverage that we are proposing to take in a particular research is very important. Third is direction. Which way are we going to do this? In terms of, are we looking at it historically? Are we looking at it in contemporary times? Are we looking at it through a futuristic perspective or a futuristic lens is very important. And of course, there are limitations to any research and the researcher in terms of funding, in terms of time, and in terms of one's knowledge. So there are limitations, of course. And then outcomes are very important, which has to come in the research proposal. What could be the outcomes of this research? So for instance, one is doing research on the impact of media, or let's say the impact of some teleserials on the TV, and the effect of that on the youth, for instance. Firstly, of course, you'll need to define who the youth are, and would it be defining them in terms of, which is called a working definition. So would you be defining them in terms of age, or would you be defining them in terms of maturity? And then, of course, you go on to the question of correlating these TV serials with the youth, and then what would be the outcomes of that? Would it be a useful product that we can change these the contents of these TV serials, or open it up, etc., etc. So the outcome is very important, and of course, finally, the usefulness of that research. Has that research been done earlier, and you're just duplicating it and replicating it, or is it something really new that we have come up with? Just to give you an example, for a very long time, sickle cell anemia was thought to be a disease, and even now it is in many ways. And there were many scientists who worked on this and said, sickle cell anemia is actually bad because it decreases the supply of oxygen to the body, which is quite true. But over a period of time, we also came to learn something new, that malaria generally affects populations in tropical areas. So further research led to the idea that probably the human body has developed some kind of resistance to the malarial parasite Plasmodium. But more importantly, it has developed this through a biological change, which we call mutation. And possibly the sickle cell anemia is a mutation which is necessary in the tropical area. So if you have sickle cell anemia in the tropical areas, and which generally is true, most people have sickle cell anemia in the tropics, it actually helps you combat the Plasmodium vivax. So it is a further addition to the stock of knowledge that we already had. So it questions the idea whether sickle cell anemia is actually a disease or not, because it actually helps you to survive, through some kind of natural selection. Okay, can we go to the next, please? Next slide. Okay, so what are the essential ingredients of research? So we have the issue. So, you have to observe certain phenomena in society or in nature, and then, ask very fundamental questions as to why is this happening, and, think over and, ruminate over this particular issue for a very long time, when you have no answers. And then you come up with the question, why does it happen? And how do we, try and gather data about it, so as to have some kind of a hypothesis. Basically, a hypothesis is some kind of an assumption that you have. All of us have assumptions, all of us make some choices. So what is the path that you're going to take? What is the assumption that you're going to take is your hypothesis. And then you come to research design, which I will come to very shortly. And then finally, you come with what will be the benefit of this research that you come out with. Would it help save human lives? Would it actually help, eradicate or alleviate poverty, for instance? Would it help, society at large, etc., etc.? So these are the fundamental questions we ask while doing research. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do we make the research proposal? So this is the first part of any research. And as I have already stated, a research proposal is an outline that we make of how we are going to do this research. Of course, this is a very tentative document that we have, because while doing research, we change certain steps. We can even change, very rarely, of course, but we can even change the goalposts that we have set for ourselves. But it depends on, what kind of findings come along when you're doing this kind of research. So the first step, of course, is you need to observe and you need to provide yourself the context. So and content. So for instance, you come up with the idea of, say, why do many accidents occur on Saturdays or weekends, for instance, Saturdays especially. And of course, there is an alternative theory, which is quite non-scientific, which says, Saturdays, in our mythology, Shanivar. So it basically means that, probably, and you'll find a lot of these lemons and these chilies being sold on that particular day, and so as to ward off the evil, etc., etc. But if you were to think of this scientifically and ask yourself, possibly why do accidents occur, at more regularity, especially on Saturdays? The answer could possibly be, of course, there have been some research conducted in major cities. They found that weekends being holidays, most families try and rush out of the cities, and in doing so, there is already a traffic, congestion, and it leads to probably being higher for accidents to take place. So this would be a much more scientific kind of a view, and of course, a lot of data could be collected on this, and then how does it happen and why does it happen, etc., etc. So you need a context, you need an issue, to ask these questions of why, how, when, etc. And then, of course, you justify your research. You need to justify why you are doing this particular research, because it's not been done earlier, or it has been done earlier, but you want to look at it through a new perspective, through a new lens, and you might want to re-examine a particular phenomena, etc., etc. And then, of course, most importantly, you need to be creative. You need to come up with a new idea, and research always pushes the boundaries of human endeavor. So you need to ask questions that have probably not been asked earlier. They might seem stupid at that point of time, But as and when we go about doing the research, probably stupidity gets converted into creativity. So I think people might laugh at you if you ask very simple and very basic questions, but I think as a social scientist or as a scientist, one needs to think divergently, think differently, think out of the box, and be creative in doing whatever we are doing. So, and of course, you need to think through your research. You need to ask very fundamental questions as to why do you want to do this particular research, and how does it, where will it lead to? And of course, you need to anticipate certain problems that might come along while doing this research. And you need to set yourself a time schedule, a timetable, which is very important, because you need to have some kind of, a deadline to complete your research. You can't just say, I'm going to do this research and it's going to go on forever. You need to have a realistic time frame of doing any kind of research. Next slide, please. Okay, so getting started, how do we start? We begin with a tentative title. We have a background of why we are doing that. We have a problem statement. We need to, give a statement as to what is the problem there. Why is it happening? And then, of course, aims and objectives, rationale and context. The outline is very important because it gives you an overall frame. A review of literature or literature review is very important because it allows you to understand what has already been done in that particular area or field of research, which is very important. And then using that knowledge, you go ahead. So a review of literature is most important. And then, of course, methodology, you have research design, hypothesis, etc., which come in that. And then you have methods of data collection and analysis. Why and how do you collect this data? Do you do it through schedules? Do you do it through samples, surveys, etc., depend on what kind of research design you have. And of course, ethical issues are very important. So for instance, you are researching on suicides that have taken place, and you're interviewing family members and close friends of the person who's deceased. You need to ensure that you follow certain ethics while pursuing this kind of research. Or a rape victim, for instance, and there's a lot of media buzz when something like this happens, but one has to ensure that one follows certain ethics while doing any kind of research. So, and of course, you have a timeline, resources, what kind of funding are you getting, and will that funding actually be sufficient for you to carry out this research? Is something a researcher must think in advance. And what could be the outcomes? And finally, in your proposal, you have something called a reference list, or also called a bibliography, which is very important because which is nothing but a part of the review of literature, something that you've already read. Next slide, please. So you start with the title, and the title has to be very clear, cogent, and comprehensive at the same time. So the title should tell you what you are proposing to do in your particular research, and at the same time it must ensure that it is temporally and spatially valid. That is to say, in time and space, it is valid. So you can say, I'm doing a particular research, and I'm trying to find out poverty indices from 1970 to 2001, for instance. So you need to specify the time periods, or you'd also need to specify a particular geographical area. So you're going to say, I'm going to look at India, I'm going to look at Maharashtra, I'm going to look at Punjab, or I'm going to look at one particular district in one particular state. So you have to ensure that your title is cogent and it's very clear. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a very important part of any research, and I think when we actually do and come up with a research proposal, it is always advisable to do a partial review of literature even before and while making a research proposal. So, for instance, you come up with the idea of any particular phenomena, and you need to read about what has been the work that has already been done by researchers and scholars across the world. So it's not only in India, but you need to refer to work that has already been done across the world. And there are certain theoretical formulations, perspectives that have been given. So you must be aware of that while making your research proposal. But basically, review of literature is an ongoing process. It doesn't end until you finish your research. And even after your research, you keep reading more about what is happening in that particular field. So it's an ongoing process, and review of literature basically gives you an idea of gaps in research that probably have not been covered by other scholars and scientists. So you look for certain gaps, you look for certain, certain, let's say, pitfalls that have not actually been addressed by scholars earlier. So you look at these gaps, and in these gaps is where you want to actually fill in new knowledge. So the idea that you can actually do research is to first find what are the research gaps. Okay, so it supports your hypothesis. Your hypothesis could be, basically a null hypothesis where you deny, or it could be a positive one where you say, okay, this is actually correlated to that particular phenomena. Of course, you need to prove it. So either ways, you begin with these kinds of hypothesis, and you begin with review of literature. The second part, of course, in any research is to extend previous research. So, for instance, Newton's work was extended further, and of course, questioned by Albert Einstein, where he said, he brought in a theory of relativity and he questioned the earlier Newtonian laws. But both are important in modern physics. So the idea that you can extend a work already done by a scholar or a set of scholars is also doing research. It need not be that you come up with something extraordinarily new. It could be just extending something that has been done in, say, a particular geographical area, and you might like to take a new geographical area or a new time span and extend that particular theory or that particular research that has been already conducted. And of course, it is to avoid previous mistakes that have been done. Mistakes are also part of research, and they're documented. We call them mistakes today, but over a period of time, it may not be seen as mistakes, but it could also be seen as a knowledge addition to that particular field. Okay, and finally, we try to be unique in our ways while doing research. We try and have novel ideas. We try and try to be creative. We try to find out new kinds of knowledge streams, new phenomena, new ways of addressing these phenomena, which have not previously been thought out. So the idea is to keep generating newer and newer knowledge and newer information. Next slide, please. Okay, generally for review of literature now, of course, it is much easier in today's generation, where you can actually use the internet, and it has a ready-made database. Earlier, when the internet was not available, people would actually travel from place to place, from libraries to libraries, getting and laboratories, trying to get theses, trying to get all kinds of documents, unpublished, published, and trying to gather information. Today, it has become much easier where you have texts and all kinds of information on the internet, and you can easily access so many journals and so many libraries just sitting at your home. So I think researchers today definitely have an advantage over the researchers and research done in earlier times. So with today's new age technologies, we can actually do fantastic research work if we have that kind of creativity. Next slide, please. Okay, so we finally, when we're doing the proposal, we start with a statement. We have to ask what it is, why it is, and how it is, because that is the most important part. So it gives you a purpose. It tells you how your review of literature would be. And please recollect what I had said earlier. The review of literature doesn't begin with research, while doing your research proposal, but it begins earlier, much earlier when you set your ideas and focus on what you are going to do. So you need to first read about it and then make a research proposal. And then, of course, you have a focus on how you begin, and you track your whole proposal through. Next, please. Aims and objectives, something which I've already talked about, but you need to have a general statement of intent. So for instance, you're doing something in terms of, say, corruption and politics, which is a very generalized idea, what it means and how it is correlated. And then you finally need to narrow down. I'll come to that particular phenomena, that particular research process shortly. But you need to narrow down. So from a general statement, we generally go down further to a very narrow kind of an area of research that we are interested in. This is called a deductive research logic. Okay, there are two ways of knowing anything. One is called deduction and one is called induction. The deduction part is going from a general statement to a particular statement, whereas induction is going from a particular phenomena to a generalized phenomena. So for instance, all of us know that metals expand on heating. So if I were to do some kind of research, say in silver, I begin with the idea that has already been tested, and I start off with the generalized statement that all metals expand on heating, and then I would of course come with the hypothesis that since silver is also a metal, it probably will expand on heating. And I test it, and it is proved and then I end up with the generalization that yes, it is possibly true that all metals expand on heating. Induction is the other way around, when we don't know for sure that a particular phenomena is like this. So you begin with a particular problem. So you can begin with, say, a coconut tree which has leaves, and then you go on to, say, a guava tree, and you say, okay, that also has leaves, and then a mango tree, okay, that also has leaves, and finally you're saying from particular experiences you generalize and make a general theory and say possibly all trees have leaves. So these are the two methods that we generally use in research. Next slide, please. Okay, what are the kinds of research that we carry out in sciences and in social sciences? There are two major kinds. Of course, these are not watertight bound research techniques. One is called quantitative research and the other is called qualitative. The basic difference is in quantitative, which is more lab-based, which is more concerned with natural sciences. where you have to quantify certain kinds of phenomena, where you need to quantify certain kinds of processes. This is where you use quantitative. Of course, it's used in social sciences also, where you need to say, for instance, take empiric data from society, where you need to have statistical analysis. For instance, in economics, where you have GDP numbers, etc., you use quantitative kind of research. Qualitative is a much more subtle form of research, in which um, the abilities of the researcher comes into play. So, for instance, if we take the earlier example of say farmer suicides in India, for instance, and the farmer suicides have been rising, for instance, and you ask the question, why is it happening? You need to have a very subtle way of getting that information from these families, and this is mainly in form of narratives and mainly in form of oral communication, where you gather data which is not documented per se, and therefore it involves extensive interviews, extensive narratives. You can even um, uh, get data through autobiographies or diaries, personal diaries, for instance. One of the best examples of proving the Holocaust during the World War II was the diary of Anne Frank, and how she hid, and all her daily memoirs that she penned down. So qualitative is much more subjective in that sense, because quantitative is objective, because you already have data which you need to put together and analyze. Whereas qualitative is which has a human factor in it, and it is very difficult to get this kind of data. So these are the two major compartments in doing research. But in most research, in social sciences especially, we use both quantitative and qualitative data. So we use government reports, we use media reports, reports of the NGOs, statistics, etc. But we also corroborate this with data from the human beings or the subjects, and we try and elicit all kinds of responses. It could be through a questionnaire also. Excuse me. And we corroborate, and we cross-check whether the data speaks to each other, the quantitative speaks with the qualitative, and then we come to a particular conclusion. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now we come to another major component of research, and which is what is methodology. If you look at this particular term, method and logy, it is actually a science of the methods that we're going to use. And what does it actually mean? It means we use a particular perspective, or we use a particular lens to understand a particular phenomena. So, for instance, if we were to look at violence against women in India, we would need to use particular concepts. We need to understand power relations which are invisible, because what seems outside might not be what actually happens in their everyday life. So, for instance, we use a concept called patriarchy, which means the rule of the male in family and in society, and we elaborate this particular phenomena through a particular lens called the feminist theory, or feminist perspective, where feminism has extended this idea that women are second-class citizens, because right from the childhood they have to, and it is not only that the men create conditions of violence against women, but women themselves create these conditions because they internalize the value systems, for instance, that they socialize in. So why does the mother-in-law torture the daughter-in-law, and when the daughter-in-law becomes the mother-in-law, why does she continue this violence? Knowing and actually having experienced violence throughout, why does she actually continue that form of violence? And it has something to do with this particular concept of patriarchy, and how the feminists have understood our relations, and how a woman actually through her whole life internalizes these value systems, wherein she believes that ensuring some kind of control over the younger woman in the family gives one power. So much so that they even control the sexuality of that particular individual. So for instance, it is not rare for us to see a young woman who's newly married to ask her in-laws when to have a child, okay, because it is her body, and it is it is a decision that she and her partner should be taking. But generally it happens in a very inverse manner, where elders are asked as to what should one be doing. So this particular phenomena we can understand through a feminist perspective. There are various perspectives. There are Marxist perspective, there's a functionalist perspective, liberal perspective, neoliberal. So I mean, what kind of theory do you understand a particular phenomena is very important, especially in social sciences. Of course, in natural sciences also you have certain kinds of theories given by scientists which you would like to follow, trying to assess that particular or examine that particular phenomena. So methodology is not only about methods that one uses, but it is a larger perspective. It is a larger lens through which one might like to comprehend a particular phenomena. Next slide, please. Okay, now we come to what are research designs. Once we are sure of what we want to do, what kind of research we want to undertake, and what is the methodology, what is the theoretical perspective through which we are going to look at this particular phenomena, we come to the next stage, which is called research design. So for instance, if I were to understand the growth of capitalism in England over the last 3-4 centuries, I would use a historical perspective. I would go back to colonialism. I would go back to or probably even to Renaissance that happened in Europe, to Enlightenment period, to Industrial Revolution, trying to assess how capitalism emerged in Europe, and then how it affected capitalism in England, for instance. So this is a historical frame, and therefore this research design that we would like to use is a historical research design. Experimental is something which we use in especially in psychology or in natural sciences, where you have a control group, for instance. So say I would like to measure what has been the impact of music on a particular class of students, and I would do a longitudinal study. So I would actually ensure that the set of students are with me for the next 10 years or 5 years or whatever, and I treat them with some kind of music, and then check out if their IQ has increased or not over a period of 5 or 10 years. But the condition here is that the students must be the same. They can't change. So therefore, the class cannot change, and therefore the control group has to remain as it was. Members of that class cannot change. which means it has to be more of a laboratory kind of condition. And of course, in natural sciences, we generally use experimental research designs with different chemicals, with different, different apparatuses and different products. So experimental is more or less something that any research that we can control. But in social sciences, generally, most of these things are out of our hand. So we are trying to assess larger questions which are not in the control of the researcher. So we generally use the other types of research designs. Comparative is, of course, if you were to compare one geographical area with another, or two time periods, for instance. So if you were to compare, say, London with New in terms of pollution, or you were to look at Delhi itself, but in 1990s and 2020. So it would be comparative. It is, you're comparing a particular phenomena with a particular era with another era or a geographical area. Diagnostic is something which is related to, it's a medical term actually, and diagnostic research design is undertaken especially when you want to find out the reasons why a particular malaise is endemic in a particular society. So for instance, if we were to look at same question of, say, domestic violence against women, we can also use a diagnostic perspective to understand. We need to diagnose. It's just like we diagnose a disease. Doctors do that. So we diagnose why are women, for instance, subservient and second-class citizens. And then once we have a diagnosis, we can also suggest action plan for empowering them. They should have jobs, they should have the purchasing power. That is to say, they should have power of spending, they should have power of decision making, etc., etc. So diagnostic is more or less a directed form of research design. And some researchers also call this action research, wherein you can do some kind of this research in ensuring development in certain communities, in certain parts of or in certain components of society. So how do we ensure that the tribals, for instance, take to modern education, for instance? So you could use a particular diagnostic frame of mind, frame of research. Then, of course, you have descriptive, which is describing a particular phenomena in great detail. You could take any particular phenomena and describe what it is and how it is, and how one could extend this particular research area. And of course, finally, you have the exploratory research design, in which you take up a theme which is quite futuristic. Say, for instance, what would be human society in the next 100 years? What kind of, say, for instance, what kind of cities would we have in the next 100 years? Now, this research being futuristic, there's not much available review of literature, because it is futuristic, and research generally is done in contemporary or in the past. It is very difficult to gauge what and where human society would head, for instance. And therefore, you have this particular research design, in which you have research direction which is futuristic, and therefore you might not actually have hypothesis for an exploratory research design. You keep it open, and as and when you get any kind of information, please remember it's more in terms of simulation of data that we get, and then we assume that in the next 100 years this is where we would be. Next slide, please. Okay, then we come to, let me give you an example of, so we have done something called research proposal. We looked at how we do it and what research is all about. We looked at research designs. I would not go into research tools per se, because that would take another lecture, but research tools are basically, how do you gather information? Do you do it through interviews? Do you do it through schedules? Do you do it through sampling, etc., etc.? And generally, this is what we use in social sciences. In natural sciences, of course, you have a similar kind of method of collecting data, in which you use different components. I'll start with an example here, just to reiterate whatever I've been talking about in the last half an hour or so. Let's take an example of an exploratory, it is a futuristic and yet contemporary question. Are humans as species still evolving? Are we, we all know Darwin's theory, which states that, all of us evolved through the apes, and, everything is evolving, everything is mutating. There is nothing constant, basically. So if everything around us is mutating, are humans also actually mutating? Is one question we could ask. And if we are mutating, are we actually losing our third molar, which is the last grind? It's that big tooth, which we call as the wisdom tooth. Most of us are losing it, in the sense, either it does not erupt, or even if it does erupt, it has to be surgically removed. So if it has to be surgically removed, why are we losing that last molar? Is it another way of understanding that the humans are actually evolving? And if so, if we are evolving, and if that is a proof that we are evolving, then what are the causes? What are the biological or the social causes for this change? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I said, in exploratory design, it's much more of a futuristic kind of a thing. So we start with a general theory of Darwin. Like I said, we are using the deductive model here. We begin with Darwin's theory of evolution. We go to the idea of survival of the fittest and how humans evolved. And then, of course, how are we evolving as a species today? And finally, there are examples from various parts of the body that we are evolving. For instance, you must have heard of another scientist called Lamarck, who said, if you don't use a particular organ in the body, which is not necessary, it becomes a vestigial organ. So are the teeth, the last molars, actually becoming vestigial in that sense, just like the appendix, or, the gallbladder, for instance, or any other part which we might not be actually needing. And then finally, we come to, of course, we collect data from a large pool of humans. And please remember, the data that we collect needs to be heterogeneous, in the sense it needs to include both male and female, and of course, there's transgenders now. And you need to also look at different geographical areas. And does this fact occur across the world, is the question that you need to ask. And if it is so, then it is definitely a proof that humans are evolving. Next slide, please. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, so what is the narrative of a good review literature? Is you start with a very general idea and you come down. Yeah, next slide. So first we collect data on what Darwin has already talked about, what Lamarck has talked about, what other scholars and scientists have come up with. Next slide, please. So you begin with the idea, which is large and broad based, of human evolution. And like I said, human evolution, we might know through other phenomena also. Possibly, a new phenomena that has come to light is, for instance, the use of our eyes. You must be noticing and observing that large section of our, of children, toddlers, are actually now using spectacles. Now, the loss of clear sight, is it related to evolution, or is it related to some other phenomena, something in which research is already ongoing? And if it is evolution, then are we evolving because there is a change in the natural environment and social environment, because we have more screens and we have more all kinds of electronic devices around us? Is that affecting our eyesight? It's a question, for instance, you might like to ask. So you begin with a very general question of human evolution. Next, please. And the question which is more futuristic is, and contemporary, of course, is, are we evolving, and what is the proof that we are evolving? And finally, last, please, is the specific instances that you can find around us. So dentists have actually proved, and anthropology, which is a discipline that studies human evolution, both biological and cultural. It has proved, since the time, for instance, the first humanoid emerged in Africa, in a gorge called the Olduvai Gorge, some 2 million years ago. They have proved that we have actually migrated, across the world as we know it, different continents, and therefore the climate and the weather conditions have actually shaped our physiology in terms of skin color, in terms of all our features, and etc., etc. But more importantly, as a species of humans, we have spread out in search of, all of us were food, hunters and food gatherers. So we set out in terms of settling down for gathering food, and we move to different parts of the world as we know it today. So human anthropology studies these changes, and recent studies have suggested that we are evolving. For instance, we are losing body hair, we are losing the last molar. The earlobe that we earlier had is also, is missing in newer generations. So how would, we need to ask the question, why is this happening? And possibly dentists have come up with the idea that since we are eating processed food, food that is already, processed through machines, we don't need our teeth grinding. Please remember, the molar teeth was actually used for grinding food grains. And since we are already consuming, processed food, possibly we don't need those teeth any longer, and possibly even the others gradually. And therefore, since we began with the hypothesis, yes, that we are evolving, and we are trying to understand this process through the loss of the last molar. We are asking a pertinent question as to where would we be heading, and if we need to change this, what kind of changes can we make in human relations and human endeavors, is a question that we need to ask. Next slide, please. Okay, so like I said, we begin with the general idea, narrow it down, and we come to a very particular issue. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. Okay, so this was just an example. We began with a very generalized question as to what is human evolution about. Are we still evolving? And then finally, we prove it through the idea that we are losing our last molars because of the changes in environment, of course, but also in our social habits. And therefore, possibly these teeth are no longer required. And therefore, it supports the hypothesis that we had, yes, that we are evolving. Next, please. Okay, finally, in any research, like I said, you need to have a timeline, very important. This research cannot go on forever. You can have longitudinal studies, you can have contemporary kinds of studies, but whatever they are, you need to set a timeline. And of course, you need money for doing all this. Next slide, please. Okay, so the budget, why do you need a budget is you need to travel, you need to visit libraries, you need to meet people, you need to record, you need to, for whatever technical and other needs, you need to firstly have a budget of for doing any kind of research. Next. And finally, what is your outcome? Why are you doing this particular research, and how will it, help you? Would it lead to any kind of degree, or would it help you get a patent? Would it lead to, contribution in technology, science and technology? Would it lead to, newer ways of looking at any particular phenomena, etc. is also very important. Next slide, please. This is a very important point here. Finally, when you write your thesis or write your research, or when you present it, you should know who your audience is. Whom are you, presenting this research to? If you are presenting this to a common man, common public, we generally tend to avoid any kind of, theoretical parlance in our writings. We generally use very simple words, simple sentences. I'm because any research or anything, any knowledge has to be communicated in a certain way. So who is your audience? If you are addressing this to a set of scholars who have already worked on this, you could use all the jargon that scientific community uses. But if it is to the public, then you need to have a different style of writing up any particular research. Okay, so in this particular lecture, I have run through quite quickly, rather, because research methodology is a whole paper. But I've quickly run through the ideas of what is research, how you begin with it, why do you begin with it, and of course, what are the constraints that are involved in research, and of course, research designs that we have, and of course, two kinds of research, quantitative and qualitative. And I didn't stress much on the research methods per se, the different tools that we use. They're also called the tools of research. You might like to look them up. Any kind of research already has specified what tools they have used for gathering this data. And finally, I did take an example just to elaborate on how we use the deductive method or the inductive method in doing research, and how do we do it on a large scale or on a small scale. But most importantly, for any research to be done, we need to keep in mind that we are, doing this particular study based on studies that have already been done. And therefore, a review of literature a thorough review of literature is a must, even before starting with any kind of research. I'll end here, and if anyone has questions, I'd definitely like to take those. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand or you can put them in the chat box.
Any questions, anyone?
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
I think the
And-
lecture was so vast and extensive, sir, that I don't think the students have any questions.
Okay.
But if
Thank
they
you so
are,
much.
I'm sure we can have one offline lecture someday with you again.
Sure, sure. We'll do that.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you so
for
much.
joining us today, and
Thank
thank
you.
all the students.
Thank you so much. Yeah, have a good day. Thank you.
We'll be sharing the feedback forms with Mandar, sir. Please fill them, everyone.
Sure, ma'am.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.